Let's go back to recording. Yes, Daniel, your lit paper is going to be due on Friday. You know, obviously, guys, if you have questions, comments, concerns, shoot me an email. I'll get back to you. I'm perpetually grading if I'm not teaching, and then I get to work on a couple other projects, so that's fun. But yeah, lots of grading in my existence these days, and that's okay. So, you know, don't hesitate to shoot me a message if you have questions. And tonight we're going to be talking about weight management. So effectively, how do we keep our body weight effectively somewhere around the realm of where we want to keep it for that individual to have effectively all of the positives that we're looking for with their life, performance, both in their sporting endeavor and then throughout the rest of it, and then making sure that we're keeping in mind the long-term goals. So like anything else, it's going to be wildly different depending on the sport and the athlete's role in that sport. So obviously, yeah, if you're a bodybuilder, if you're a figure competitor, you're going to have to be, for your competitions, incredibly lean. But that's going to be something that's not really feasible, much less really healthy to maintain that level of leanness for a long period of time. So obviously, we're going to have periods of the year where we're going to cycle our weight up a little bit in both body weight overall and then possibly body fat percentage, or probably body fat percentage. And then parts of the years we're going to cycle it down. Now, there's other sports where really body comp really has no bearing. All that really matters is your performance. And, you know, this can be things like archery, riflery, golf, where it doesn't really matter as long as you can do the job. And yes, you can probably get to a body comp where literally you're getting in the way of your own body size, just due to mass that's making it difficult to assume certain positions and to do them efficiently. Just like it is possible to legitimately become too muscular to do certain movements, but that requires you to be insanely muscular, because if you look at gymnasts, you look at their muscular development and the fact that they still have got great mobility and great performance, it's obviously not the biggest limiting factor. But trying to keep in mind, are we getting someone where they need to be, or are we punishing them to get to specific points because of our own self-imposed ideals? So either go ahead and unmute yourself, or you can go ahead and just put it up in chat. Give me an example of a sport where body composition matters, but it matters in the sense that we've got a pretty wide range that we probably want to be within.
Football.
Yeah. And so, you know, great job, guys. Soccer, European football, and American football are great examples where you don't want to be too lean. And obviously, depending on, for American football, too lean very much so depends on the positional role. Whereas when you look at, because the front row individuals in rugby are more like linemen, or more like running backs, they're bigger people. And the back row are more like wide receivers, defensive backs that are smaller, faster individuals. So it's not just lower muscle mass, but typically lower fat mass and definitely potentially lower body fat percentage. Obviously, as you go from being the offensive line or the front row when it comes to scrums in rugby to whenever you go to your backs position. And then, yes, your midfielders are going to probably be leaner just because of the damn caloric demands. Your goalies can probably be a little bit fluffier on average, but those given roles are going to give us those varieties of performances. So unless we're talking about bodybuilding, where you need to be literally lean enough that you can see the striations in somebody's glutes, which is stupid lean, for the most part, we're usually going to have a good range of anywhere from 5, 10, maybe even 20 percentage points, meaning we can be a very healthy, effective athlete in our role if, as a male, you're between 5 and 25% body fat, which effectively is, as long as you're not ultra lean where you're really risking injury because you're just very fragile, and then getting into that obesity where now you're just carrying extra weight that's slowing you down. We just need to make sure that we match that up. Now, the major modifier in the background is going to be the wonders of genetics. So unfortunately, it turns out genetics are going to have a pretty big influence on our ability to both gain weight and lose weight. So when we're trying to do either, thanks to your parents, congratulations, this is your predisposition. So Your lifestyle obviously is going to influence it heavily, but your genetics is what's going to influence that within. The one really good analogy that I heard, it's actually from a gentleman, well, J.L. Holdsworth, the guy that we, or no, sorry, not Holdsworth, J.M. Blakely, the guy that we broke down his insane diet for, just for fun, where you're going to see that in situations where you're taking in a lot of calories to gain weight. Some folks have a really hard time putting it on weight when they try to eat more. Their resting metabolism really cranks up. Their non-exercise activity thermogenesis really cranks up, and it's really, really difficult for them to put on weight. Just like the antithesis can be true for certain people to lose weight. So the analogy that he gives is, you can see a vending machine. It costs $1 to get a soda. So, you put in your dollar, you press the button, and you get the soda. Now somebody walks up to it and they just put a quarter in and push the button and they get the soda. And you're like, well, hold on, how come they just got the soda for a quarter of the price? Like, well, it turns out, thanks to their genetics, it's that much less expensive. It's that much easier for them to do it. And then somebody else who comes up after you, maybe they got to feed 3, 4, 5 bills into the machine before they'll finally get that soda they want. So in reality, it has a cost, but the cost is very much so depending on the individual. It's not difficult for me to keep a body weight over 200 pounds, whereas it wasn't difficult for me to keep a body weight over 200 pounds when I had a multitude of chins. So for me to be big is big, not that big, let's be honest, is not that difficult. But for other people, it's a whole lot of work and effort for them to get that body weight up to a higher level. And the antithesis can be true. And that's really difficult, obviously, whenever your goal is to be really small and you're naturally big, or your goal is to be big and you're naturally small, and then we have to work against those genetics that are working against us. Now, that being said, we still come down to the basic laws of thermodynamics, aka physics, which is when we're in that caloric imbalance, we're taking in more than we're burning off, we're going to gain weight, and then the opposite is true. We never break the basic rules of physics in order to go ahead and cause weight loss or weight gain. The key is, like anything else, of where is your average, and are we putting ourselves there for a long enough period of time? Questions there on influences of genetics there? Does all of you guys that sound vaguely familiar? How many of you guys are built a lot like your parents at your current age when they were your age? So from there, and this is not a judgment on your parents or otherwise, because we had a couple people that, are identifying having builds like certain parental units. How many of you guys were, oh, interesting. Miss Witt, that explains, is the strong jaw, did you get that from your dad? Sorry. But how many of you guys, your parents, as you can tell, are definitely no longer built like that? All of your parents are the exact same body weight and size as they were since they were 20? Mm-hmm. Now, that's due to a myriad of things. Yes, your metabolism changes as you get older, in that it slows down a little bit, but the bigger issue is the changes, nice, of physical activity levels, changes in things like your diet. Whereas, obviously, when your parents were younger, they were probably far more physically active. And then obviously you have the effects of pregnancy, which can cause a lot of weight accrual that can be very difficult for some ladies to get off of their body afterwards, just because of that caloric surplus they were in for so long, changes to other parts of their physiology, and it takes the body a long time to kind of reestablish that baseline. Plus also how big of a pain you guys were as children to raise. probably took away from that previous physical activity and general enjoyment of life that they had. But Stockholm syndrome kicked in, so that's how they kept you guys alive. So, thank your parents, since Mother's Day is coming up, and then Father's Day in June. But once again, genetics. Now, what we're going to see in that when it comes to the total amount of calories we're having individuals take in when we're having them effectively try to do diets where they're eating differing energy densities, and specifically having certain groups that are taking in a lot of fat, certain groups that aren't taking in a lot of fat, which is, it turns out, fat is very calorically dense. So if you look from the left to the right, you can see the differences of how, the group that is eating a diet that naturally is higher in fat percentage-wise are also taking in a greater amount of calories each day, because you can see otherwise the weight of the food is approximated. Now, what this is getting down to is what is sometimes referred to as volumetrics, of just making sure that we're getting in not just enough calories, but we're also giving enough just kind of bulk of food to help with hunger and satiety. Now, when it comes to hunger and satiety, what we're really talking about is now everything that feeds into regulating our natural appetite. So we have our wonderful nervous system where all of this interfaces. Now, there's a number of inputs. Now, if you guys will kind of work our way around it. In the upper left, we've got the taste of food, smell of food, and then the nutrients behind it. So when the world was still working, how many of you guys ever would walk by like a Chick-fil-A, or who knows, maybe you guys are still getting a chance to walk by there. Walk by like a pizzeria, walk by a Cinnabon. Cinnabons are the worst when you're walking by those in the mall, and just like you almost feel like you're gaining weight just from the calories in the air because of how awesome that is. And then all of a sudden you have the desire to go eat when in reality you could have just had a meal beforehand. I'm the only one. Okay, fair enough. So all of those are going to cue hunger. Thank you, Courtney and Justin. I was afraid it was just me. Now, we then have, when we're talking about the neurological side, you've got the time of day, social situations, stress that's going on in your life. And so that's why it's easy to stress eat, to sit there and throw down and snack. And I guess one of the, I'm hardly plugged into social media because it's not a happy place these days. But I came across something where they were talking about the, I believe the term was the, what was it? Not the coronavirus body, but a quarantine body, where the idea is that, some folks are getting in shape because now they got nothing to do but work out. And then other folks are getting in a little bit more pear shape because all they have to do is eat because, they're stressed out and nervous and everything. How many of you guys, if you have an open bag of chips next to you whenever you're sitting there watching the TV or otherwise, you can easily mill through the entire thing, or like a jar of peanut butter, simply because you're just not paying attention. And that's okay. That's just when we talk about, A, the stress of, everything going on, and then B, when we're talking about, are we being aware of what's going on? And when you think about social situations, most of the major holidays, obviously, Easter was shut down, as was arguably St. Patty's Day for most places, and looks like Cinco de Mayo is not going to happen either. But when you think about a lot of the major holidays, like hopefully there'll be a chance that we can, be back with our friends and family for the 4th of July. That usually means kind of like a barbecue or a cookout. And that typically means, eating a lot of calories. And then also the whole time of day, like it's morning, I should eat because there's breakfast. It's noon, I should stop and eat lunch. It's, 5 or 6 o'clock or whenever you guys typically, like it's time for dinner, because we're used to that chronological. And that's kind of built into our memory and how that we're being told to live our life. Because how many of you guys grew up and effectively your parents told you that, you had to finish your plate before you could leave the table? Like effectively, not that you were being completely coerced into eating, but you're definitely being forced more than you probably would have preferred otherwise. And that's overriding our natural satiety signals. And instead, now we're eating because we're instructed to, which is, once again, creating these behaviors that can be both a negative or a positive effect because we're effectively no longer eating based upon our own satiety signals. Great job, Courtney. And that's really important. Now, the next big component is physical activity and effectively natural hunger levels. What we find, and we're going to get more into it on the next slide, is individuals that are not physically active, completely sedentary, their natural satiety signals are effectively dysregulated. They're no longer in accord. And then people that are insanely high activity, like people doing like the Tour de France stages or doing like an Ironman, the body, because of all the caloric demands and everything, they actually tend to undereat. But most of us, from low levels of physical activity to highly physically active, so you're just working out and really getting after it, it always tends to match. The body tends to tell you to take in as many calories as effectively it really needs to support itself. And then we get into the feedback from our digestive system and also to a lesser extent from our adipose. So that's where we talk about adiponectin, which we talked about earlier, leptin, which we've covered before, ghrelin, which are all giving us those satiety signals to our body, along with, notice, cholecystokinin, CCK, GLP-1, PYY, and a couple other of our gastrointestinal hormones that are telling our nervous system, like, we've got food, the food has got a solid amount of calories in it, we're good to go, or this guy just drank a lot of water, we still don't have any food in us, we want something because we're hungry. And then all of this is what's instructing our food intake. Now, we can go and obviously override the signal, say like, no, I'm not going to eat. We can use stimulants and other types of drugs to help essentially push down the desire to eat. And then we can use things like cannabis and otherwise, and molecules that are adjacent help increase our natural hunger levels. So all this model can be influenced, but it already has a lot of social, environmental, and emotional influences that you've had for your entire life. And so because of that, it's important to keep in mind when you're working with someone, you've got to figure out, where are they coming from? Are they coming from more of a scarcity? So they would eat as much as they could when they could because food wasn't always readily available in their home. You're going to come from someone that maybe had a lot of body shaming where they grew up. So, how much they ate and ingested was probably less than they prefer because, everyone was always judging them for their body size, or they felt judged for that matter. And then, what's going on, which is how are they socialized? I mean, this is nowhere near as egregious as the two ends of the spectrum that I just brought up. But I remember working with a guy at Kansas that literally, he would stop the work we were doing in the lab every day at noon, like, I'm going to go eat lunch. And I'm like, dude, the gel's not going to run itself. Let's get the gel running. And when you start a number of those processes, when you're looking at protein cells with Western blotting, you literally have about an hour of work to do. And then effectively you let the machine run, and the machine runs for effectively an hour again before you can do anything with it. So it's more like, let's finish that hour of work, and then when we hit the go button, let's go eat. And it blew my mind because it was like, we are done working, I must go eat, because he was that regimented and that's how he lived his life. And you're going to encounter people who are like that, and then other folks, and I'm very bad for it. Tyler Sutton and I had an agreement throughout the semester. If one of us skips lunch, the other individual owes them 25 random push-ups, because I'm very bad for skipping meals, because I'll just work through it and then all of a sudden be like, I'm really hungry and a little lightheaded. Oh yeah, I haven't eaten anything since breakfast. I should probably do something about that. So it's important that we are trying to actually create a good relationship with food and really, understand it's okay to be hungry. Hunger is just information, like pain. The key is it's how much of that information we have and how is that information affecting our life. So if you want to lose weight, and this is a really hard thing for some of the people that you might work with whenever they choose to really try to lose some weight, you're going to spend a significant amount of time being hungry. That unfortunately is normal. Now, you shouldn't be ravenous like you're ready to eat Norbert over there, but instead, you're going to be hungry at points. That's normal. And the same thing is true on the other side, where if you really want to put on weight, you're going to feel stuffed, uncomfortably full for probably decent amounts of time every day, especially when you start getting into like crazy ends of the spectrum for people that are really trying to get like massive for sports, bodybuilding, etc. Questions here on how effectively our appetite is regulated. No?
I do have a question.
Yeah, what's up, Daniel?
So I know how you said you mentioned that having hunger to lose weight is normal. Would that just be kind of like, to put it in perspective of like pain, would that be kind of like just a dull pain that's just always there? Or would it be that's the only thing I could think of? Or
Yeah, no,
would it?
it's like anything else, like once you get somebody, and that's why getting them to work out in the first place. I'm just going to go to the next slide because that'll make sense. Once you can start working out, they tend to get pretty good signaling for the fact that like, okay, like I need to eat more or I'm not eating enough. Hence the dysregulation is bad because that's where body weight can really creep up. But once we get people to be, moderately physically active, yeah, they're going to eat more because they're physically active, but they're going to know that they've like, hey, we're good. But if you're trying to change your body weight, well, it turns out your body doesn't like to get smaller because getting smaller means less reserves. Less reserves means you are more likely to have a negative outcome from something like getting essentially sick. And when you're sick, you can't eat anything, and then you die of a wasting disease. Or if food goes away, you're going to starve to death far more rapidly. And then the problem is, as far as the feedback mechanism for your body saying like, I have enough body fat isn't the best, because that's where we talk about that adiponectin and leptin, those levels where those can be a little dysregulated. And so that's why it's not like people get to a certain amount of body fat and the body's like, all right, this is as much body fat as we need. Anything else, we're just going to burn off. Instead, that wasn't really ever a problem from humans. It was more of periods of starvation. And then whenever food was available, anything that tastes good tends to be things that are calorically dense. So that's why we're so incentivized to like mill through. I mean, if you put a tray of Cinnabons in front of me, which there's gluten in there, so I'm not going to do it, but you put gluten-free ones, it's on. And also the fact that, you make decisions with, that's why we try to use that higher brain and not just the lizard brain all the time. But if I'm on a diet and I'm actively trying to lose weight to lean up to compete or something, I'm going to sit there and try to eat a plate of plain raw broccoli because it turns out it doesn't taste good, and I'm not going to really want to mill through it that much because I'm not getting that positive feedback from my brain of like, oh yeah, keep pounding down that broccoli, that stuff's amazing. Instead of be like, why aren't you doing work with the Cinnabon? Because it's delicious. It has salt, fat, and sugar, which is really the three things that our mouth is really rigged up to want to eat a lot of. And yeah, so hence it shouldn't be like once again, if you're ravenous all the time, that's how you know you're getting into too much of a deficit. But then it comes down to your own body's quote unquote set point and where you're normalized to be at. And then we're getting into just the volume of food you're eating. That's why eating a lot of fruits and vegetables tends to be a great choice in pretty much anybody's diet, because the foods there are not calorically dense. So you have to eat a bigger volume of them to get a total amount of food. So you at least get a bigger stretch on your stomach. They're slower digesting. And that's also why we suggest higher protein diets, because those give a greater amount of satiety. When I played around with going like super high protein intake, just to see what happens, it was like I was perpetually full all the time, because protein is a little bit slower digesting and it also gives you that satiety signal, where fat is even better with giving you a satiety signal. So kind of danced around there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, and so Taryn's question is, how do people control their weight when they have the syndrome that makes them have hunger sensations effectually, perpetually, and never feel full? Sorry, Taryn, I'm just kind of rewording that a little bit. So that's when we're talking about issues with leptin sensitivity and adiponectin, if I remember correctly, where those individuals are, yeah, they're literally going to never feel full. And that's where I'm getting well outside of my realm of expertise pretty rapidly there, but from the little bit that I have read on the topic, sometimes they'll try to, because if it's a lack of production of the hormone, try to like literally inject it to help do that. Sometimes they'll do things like stomach stapling and otherwise to kind of help them effectively hit the point where they're full a little bit faster. And then otherwise it's just a whole lot of, exercising your will to, effectively not eat as much. So it's a challenge, but getting back to that 3 pounds of broccoli or the Dan John diet we went through, if you're going to pound down that much roughage every day, it's going to be pretty hard to find a whole lot of room for anything else. So, questions there? Okay, so we talked about how exercise is going to help you effectively make sure that your natural amount of appetite is going to be far more in accord with what you're trying to do with your body size. Now, what's really important is when we look over there is what's known as a constrained versus added model of energy and expenditure. Now, a lot of people think it's we increase the physical activity, and that goes on top of that resting metabolic rate, the thermic effect food, that NEAT, and congratulations, we're burning more calories throughout the day. But like we've established talking about in class, that's not how it works. And that as we keep increasing that physical activity, we're going to see a decrease potentially in that resting metabolic rate and a decrease potentially also in that non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Your thermic effect of food should stay relatively the same as long as your intake is the same as it was before, specifically when we're looking at the amount of protein you're taking in, and then your carbohydrates and obviously fats to a lesser extent with those two. So it's important to understand that just because we're kicking up the physical activity doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be burning a lot more calories. And feel free to ask any questions you want. So, like anything else, you're going to see that increase in physical activity is going to give us a greater amount of caloric burn, but we can have those compensatory mechanisms of now we're going to decrease both that non-exercise activity thermogenesis and that resting metabolic rate, so we're not going to make progress as quickly as we would before. So there are so many different weight loss methodologies. It really just comes down to calories in, calories out. So energy restriction and reduced fat intake, those are two ways. They're kind of the basic way, just decreasing calories. And then reducing fat for some folks can be really useful because since fat tends to be a very calorically dense, so like pound for pound, you cannot eat as much. It's like a jar of peanut butter, once again, compared to that broccoli. You can eat jars of broccoli all day and you'll never gain a pound. You do a jar of peanut butter a day on top of your other meals, that's some solid bulking season. So that's kind of the advantage there of reducing the fat intake. But for some folks, when it comes to satiety and personal preferences of food choices, it's probably better to go with very fibrous vegetables and then put on fat like a cheese or otherwise on top of it that they're going to enjoy and, get them in the deficit. Now, you've probably seen very low energy diets. This is where you're getting into things like the HCG diet and, in individuals using fasting diets or fasting mimicking diets. The fasting mimicking diet, if you're doing it for arguably health reasons, so, decreasing cancer risk and longevity, that might be helping you. But the biggest thing to always keep in mind when you're doing any of these modalities for losing weight, which is whatever you did to get yourself there, that's very similar to what you have to do forever to stay there. And if you're not willing to do that forever, then you need to find some modality that is a lot kinder and gentler for how you like to live your life. Otherwise, you're going to be super uncomfortable. So food combining diets is just some of the craziest bug nutty things I've ever seen, which is if you eat these two foods together, you're going to go ahead and have these problems because if you do potatoes with chicken, that causes you to get fatter. So if you just do potatoes with one meal and chicken with the other, that won't do it. That's complete malarkey. It doesn't work like that. The zone diet is just a simple breakdown of doing effectively 1/3 fat, 1/3 protein, 1/3 carbs for intake. It's a system. It is pretty useful in that it gets people thinking about how much they're taking in of different nutrients. And for some folks, it works really well. Other folks, not so much. Same thing with we go low carb diet, we do a high protein diet. All of those can potentially work. The key is the individual, what they prefer to do, what they prefer to eat, and what's going to be the matching lifestyle. And the other thing is sometimes if you're trying to do a diet that you're trying to lose weight on, you should probably pick foods that you don't really enjoy. Because it turns out it's really hard to overeat on plain oatmeal, like no flavoring, no nothing in it. It's easy to overeat on ice cream. So if you pick a food source and then obviously a macronutrient source that you just don't enjoy as much, you're probably going to be less likely to eat a whole lot of it. Now, manipulation of energy density, that's that volumetric. So the idea of we can do an entire plate of vegetables, or we can do like 2 Oreos. So using foods that are a lot less calorically dense can allow us to feel a lot fuller. Plus, they tend to have a better micronutrient profile. And I saw your comments, Courtney. I'm going to come back to them. There are some ideas of trying to go and do like more dairy because calcium in theory does help a little bit with your metabolic rate, but it's not that big of a deal. You then have non-nutritive sweeteners where some people think it causes cancer, and in reality it doesn't. But the other problem is there's so many different types of sweeteners that it's not like one is more dangerous than the other. And if anything, when you look at the amount you'd have to take in from the rodent models to cause toxicity, like it's insane. But if you're that concerned with it, just drink water. And then obviously, yeah, you get people that think vegan is the greatest thing ever, just like you got people that think carnivore is the greatest thing ever. And if that is true for them, that's fine. I don't care. But that's going to be, both those diets are very restrictive. So you've got to be deliberate. You got to make sure you're getting in some of those other micronutrients. So some of those vitamins and minerals, because you might not be getting enough of them when you're doing them. And then obviously, it requires you to definitely be very deliberate with your intake. And so you can do that, that's fine. Just like you can do the good old YOLO method of if it fits your macros, IIFYM. And so, yeah, if you want to do 100 grams of carbs each day through sweet potatoes, fine. Rice, fine. Pixie sticks, fine. It's 100 grams of carbs. It's probably not the best like long-term health decision, just because once again, getting to those micronutrients and some of the phytonutrients you'll get from doing vegetables and otherwise. But, you know, if you're trying to look cool, then by all means. Okay, so Courtney's question is, would elimination diet be considered dietary weight loss methods? Elimination diets are often going to be useful for people that have got digestive issues or some other type of health issues, sometimes used in some individuals that are having like autoimmune symptoms, and they find that when they remove certain foods, they no longer have issues. And I think that can be a really great choice for just about anybody. Like if you're having consistent digestive issues, take a look at the food you're eating. And then the idea with the elimination is you literally eliminate everything from your diet except for a very specific list of vegetables and then a little bit of meat. Honey, are you down here? I think my wife's upstairs watching TV, so she's going to hear me talk. Why don't you let's get roped into it? She is a dietitian. She's employed that with herself, and we use that with other folks. And that's when we found out that she has issues with gluten. Well, we found that out through the blood testing, but also has issues with some very specific dairy products, which is interesting. And yeah, so like you can use that as a modality, as a means to literally just help you feel better. And if you feel better, you tend to be more physically active. And if you're more physically active, you tend to burn more calories, and hence it's easier to maintain your weight and or lose weight. So if you or somebody you know consistently has issues, that's a good point. If you want to lose weight on foods you don't like, then I recommend the elimination diet. Yeah, you're not wrong there, because what's the start on that, Courtney? It's usually like something, it's usually really, really simple. Like it's supposed to be like effectively plain chicken. You don't really spice anything. And then there's a number of vegetables that are okay. And then I feel like maybe rice is one of the carbohydrates you can do. Like it's super whittled down. Well, that sounds like your doctor's trying to starve you. That doesn't sound like a good, healthy decision. But with the information, and we'll touch on that later on, with both nutrigenomics and microbiome, some folks, yeah, they're going to do better physically on a diet that doesn't have those components. So, since my wife has a gluten allergy, so we don't have gluten in the house, I seldom eat gluten. And the only times I do it is typically when I'm on the road, because she's literally so sensitive. I've passed it to her, kissing her goodnight before twice, and she's definitely never let me forget that. So I don't want to do that. And then, second of all, since my body's not used to processing gluten anymore, when I do process gluten, it can be rough, but chicken wings are amazing. So hence, whenever my students go with me to conferences, they wonder why I'm suddenly eating like a full-blown college student. It's like, because this is my one time a year that I can eat like a complete and total D-bag, and it's not going to come back to my wife, and I'm in the hotel's bathroom, so that's their plumbing's problem, not mine. Sorry for the overshare, guys. So when it comes to exercise for the weight loss, we're just trying to think of it as a way to get ourselves into that caloric deficit. So whatever modality they're going to find to be the most enjoyable as a means to burn calories without really accumulating a lot of extra fatigue behind it, that's probably the best bet. So obviously going for a walk is easy. Going riding an elliptical like my wife has behind us, or riding on a bike, all of those are going to be relatively lower impact, which are going to burn calories. But obviously exercising at higher intensity, so riding the bike hard, riding the elliptical hard, running faster, are going to burn more calories. But that running at higher speeds is going to incur effectively more stress on the body. So the higher the intensity we can hold, the greater amount of calories we're going to be burning during that period of time. And then at the same time, whatever we can recover from, where if we do that high intensity interval training where we're going a little anaerobic, yeah, there's going to be a little more calories during and a little bit more after, but it's not like this massive thermic effect where you're going to be jettisoning way more calories than you expect. You're just burning calories when you're doing it. You need to make sure that you're doing what you need to. I think my dog's throwing up her back. You okay, buddy? You okay? You want to go outside? Oh yeah, you threw up. I'll clean it up a little bit there. Hang on outside, buddy. It's been like a bad night in the Taco Bell bathroom in the house. Norbert was throwing up a little bit last night in the middle of the night. Then Bahamut was throwing up pretty bad this morning. But little did I know that I thought the days of me cleaning up other people's vomit wouldn't end once I moved out of the dorms, but would continue for the rest of my life. So what we're going to find when we're going through that weight loss, we're going to see a decrease in our energy expenditure that is going to be not a perfect 1-to-1 ratio, but it is going to be relatively similar. So keep that in mind. Just like when we gain weight, we're going to see an increase in our caloric needs on top, or just a little bit less than that total weight gain. So how does this influence our long-term planning? Kind of getting back to what I was talking about earlier. How does this matter? Yeah. I'm sure all of you guys have done a pretty good job of contributing tonight, so nobody really to pick on. But why does this again matter? No worries, Stephanie. If we know that your resting metabolic rate, so your daily energy expenditure is going to be going down when you've lost weight, just like it's going to be going up when you've gained weight, what's the long-term repercussions of this? Good. Courtney, that was a good shot, but Daniel, that's really what we're looking for, which is in order to keep that progress, we're going to have to keep changing things. So now, if you've already decreased your body mass some, you're going to have to decrease that energy expenditure even more to keep yourself losing weight. And the opposite is true. If you want to keep gaining weight, at a certain point, your body's going to re-equilibrate to that intake. And because of that, you're going to have to increase your caloric intake again. So that way you're going to get yourself in the surplus. And then that's where, once you get really far to either ends of those spectrums, it gets to be daunting to really keep that progress going. And so that then lends us to the next component, which is weight cycling. So literally purposefully trying to change our weight. Now, if our goal, and this is for specifically someone that's got kind of more like a bodybuilding style thought to life, where they want to have a period where they gain muscle, and then they want to have periods where they try to lose fat, your best bet is to cycle your weight. So purposefully gain weight for a certain period, usually about 1 to 3 months, hold that new body weight for a good 1 to 3 months, lean out for 1 to 3 months, and then hold that new body weight again for 1 to 3 months. This allows for the resensitization of your tissues, for your body to get used to those new body sizes and leanness, and then you can focus on trying to either gain some more lean mass or potentially lose some more fat mass. But if you're constantly in a bulk or you're constantly in a weight loss phase, the further you go, the more tissue that you're going to gain or lose is going to be more of the tissue you don't want to gain or lose. And then the harder it's going to be, both physically and psychologically, to keep that process going. So hence, the more we try to change, it follows that kind of that curvilinear relationship. So we get the greatest amount of muscle mass and or fat loss in that first month, a little bit more in that second month, and then even less in that third month. And then we're getting really close. We're pretty much hitting that plateau. And for some folks, it's even faster. So that's why we don't want to keep going 4, 5, 6 months. Now, mind you, this is talking about everybody in the class, which is people that are normal, healthy body weights and normal, healthy body compositions. If you're dealing with someone that's 300, 400, 500 pounds and they're not 7 feet tall, then yes, you can probably keep that weight loss stage going for much longer. And then you don't have to stop and then try to bulk up and then hold and then lose and then hold. Instead, it's essentially stair step them down. So get that loss, and then whenever they start to hit a wall, just be like, hey, we're just going to hang here for a little bit so they can resensitize, maybe try to build some lean mass while potentially losing a little bit of fat mass during that phase, and then work again, and then work again. That's going to be the much more kind of slow, deliberate, but effective method to kind of have that long-term weight loss, as opposed to just trying to starve it out of them, which is really hard on the body in a number of ways. Questions there? I'm going to give you guys a moment for questions. Norbert wants back in. Cool, no questions. All right. So when it comes to gender differences in weight loss, what's the immediate cliches that come to your guys' mind? Feeling better? Feeling better now that you went out and maybe puked on the lawn some more? Yeah, well, you got dog breath. Buddy. Ooh, buddy. Yes, remember there's only one O in lose. Right now you wrote down men lose weight faster. But why would you say that on average men lose weight faster? Daniel or anybody else, you guys can go and unmute yourself, or you can write it on it. Yeah, potentially. Now we're getting that hormonal differences. As a male with testosterone, it's easier to gain lean mass than it is for a female. And then typically your average male carries more lean mass than your average female, which means when we're trying to lose weight, well, we've got effectively a bigger engine to burn more calories, so it's going to be easier to get ourselves in that deficit and get ourselves to lose weight. Whereas your average female, because of the smaller body size, not using as many calories, it's going to be much more difficult for them to get themselves in that deficit that is going to keep them losing weight for longer. And so a great example, and neither of you guys need to do this, just so we're clear, because both of you guys are already a normal, healthy weight, but we've got, Dalton and Michaela both in the class. Now, 1 pound of fat mass has about 3,500 calories in it. Now, if we have them, they're going to be that, that couple that works out together, which, sometimes those couples are a little weird, but that's cool. It's good for them. And they're going to do it because they're going to effectively get into hiking, running, whatever type of cardio, but they're going to do it together. And they're both going to travel the same distance. Now, since Dalton weighs, I'm guessing after seeing him literally today with appropriate social distancing, weighs probably somewhere around 190 odd pounds. Is that about right, Bud, or am I over underestimating your body weight? You look skinny today, and that was meant to be a compliment. So we'll go through 215, because literally Michaela's pretty close to half your body weight if you're 215. And Michaela, you don't have to say your body weight. We're just going to go with that half his body weight simply because you guys are very different in height and obviously muscle mass. Now, if both of them go for a walk and they're literally matching each other step for step, literally Dalton is burning twice as many calories step for step. So if they keep their calories the same, so nothing's changed there, but now they're adding that exercise, Dalton's add twice as much exercise energy expenditure as Michaela. So he's literally going to have twice the speed of the weight loss. Does that make sense? Just as effectively a mechanism of his body weight, his body size. Good. Now, the other thing we need to keep in mind is when we're trying to have an athlete lose weight, there's a lot of practicalities, which is first and foremost, is this even useful or necessary? So if we're doing this just because the coach is a bit of a D-bag and wants to institute some real hard body dysmorphia, no, that's stupid. We're not doing it. But if we're doing it because it really will help enhance performance for our athlete, okay, well, let's talk about it, which is how fast should that athlete be losing weight? So and don't think of it as raw pounds, because remember, if we're working with a 300-pound person and working a 150-pound person, taking 5 pounds off of each of them is not as big of but 5 pounds off a 300-pound person isn't even 2%. Yeah, isn't even 2% of their body weight. For that 150-pound person, you've just taken off, a solid, 3% of their body weight, or actually over 3% of their body weight. So what percent do you think is probably a good kind of rule of thumb to work with? Not bad, Sam, not bad. I would probably argue to go for less than 1% per week. Now, if you're saying 1 to 2% per month, yeah, that's really nice. That's really conservative. The key is, like anything else, we need to track the performance while we're doing this body weight manipulation and make sure that they're not under recovering, which is causing not hopefully never injury, but it's definitely causing a decrease in performance. So we're being too aggressive with that weight loss to it's being detrimental for their overall ability to play the sport. Because that's really what we're looking for the athlete, is their ability to perform the sport, not their ability to look sweet in a t-shirt or a swimsuit or whatever. Now, I would say per week, less than 1%. And then when we talk about those goals, like, okay, how much of a weight change are we looking for? How long of a timetable do we have? And what do you guys think would probably be the best time of year to try to get this athlete to lose body weight? Summer, because that's when it's beach season, so we need to get lean, right? Yeah, Daniel's got it. You got to do it before summer, guys, where you want to look good when the shirts are off. You don't want to look fluffy and then look good when the shirt's about to go back on. There, wasted your chance. No, but in reality, guys, it depends on the athlete, obviously. If your goal should always be the off season. So if it's a football player and you need to lean them up, your best time of year to do this is going to be effectively from November into like before spring ball really starts. And then we're focusing more on maintaining our weight. Then we're really trying to lose it. If you're working with a soccer player, you're still talking about probably the spring season or the early summer, because that's when things don't matter as much. If you're talking about a collegiate basketball player, that's going to be probably in April, May, June, maybe into July, where you want to effectively try to get them to lose that weight. Because when we're in the off season, that's when we're doing the least amount of sport practice. That's when we can do arguably the greatest amount of body changes, both weight gain and weight loss, because we're not effectively at that point of year where we've got that greater volume of training and intensity that is going to put us at a greater risk of getting injured. And obviously, not just the injury, but a decrease in performance because of all the stress that we have, and now the decreased nutrients to allow us to not recover as quickly as we would beforehand. Does that make sense to you guys? Awesome. And so when we're looking at these goals, let's think about body composition. Let's think about obviously body weight, if they're especially if they're weight class athlete. And let's not just have the end goal, but let's have those process goals, what percentage change we're looking for over those weeks, months. And same thing with the weight gain, weight loss over those weeks and months. And just like anything else, setting up those systems. So trying to make sure that they are consistently eating a breakfast that's helping them get closer to their goals. A lunch and a dinner that are doing the same, a post-workout snack or pre-workout snack that's helping them with recovery, and once again, getting them closer to their goals. So when we're talking about doing the strategy, well, it turns out there's a lot of easy mistakes that people make. Humans are really, really good at overestimating how many calories they burn through exercise and underestimating how many calories they took in through their diet. And it's, if I remember correctly from some of the peer-reviewed references, you'll see some folks that I think on average they're overestimating their calories burned by like 20 to 30% and underestimating that calorie intake by 20 to 30%. So you can be talking about like a 60% difference between what you really burn and what you think you're burning, and then the other side. So holy cow. So we need to make sure that we're tracking as well as we can, both specifically outcomes that we care about, so the body weight, body composition, and at the same time, we're trying to track our exercise, track our intake as well as we can. So like anything else, people can make mistakes because they think certain foods are lower calorie than they really are, or obviously certain exercises or training programs are burning a lot more calories than they really do. So some other issues you can have is obviously athletes have to make weight. When you have to make weight for competitions, that's where you can have individuals using diuretics. You can have them obviously dehydrating themselves out to make weight, and that can get to be legitimately dangerous on their health, and then obviously decreasing their performance if we're not careful. And so when you take those diuretics, you take laxatives, you can have a lot of digestible issues. You can have some issues with dehydration, with cramping, and obviously those can give us issues with trying to perform well. And then same thing with that weight gain. We've talked about the dreamer bulk before in the class, right? Okay, so yes, it's easy to think that you're gaining the type of weight that you can flex, but in reality, you're just putting on that weight that just jiggles. Lord knows I've done that before with powerlifting. Actually, it's the first time I got up to like since being an obese high schooler. That was the first time I had gotten over 210 since then. And I would like my post-workout strategy was like one or two glasses of milk with about a dozen Oreos. So I got fluffy. But seeing as how I was doing is really lifting heavy weights and working as a stonemason, I never really saw myself with the shirt off that much, so it didn't really register until I got back and I'm like, oh, I got fat. But I'm stronger, but I am fluffier, so I should probably do something about this. So it's easy to be gaining weight too quickly. And the faster we're gaining weight, the more of that weight is probably coming in the form of adipose. You know, as a human, you're limited with literally how many pounds of muscle you can gain per week. And so if you're really trying to push that to the brink, well, it turns out you're going to be gaining a lot of things that jiggle with it. So like anything, we want to, when we're doing the same type of weight gain, just like weight loss, only talking about 1% or way less than that per week. And arguably for somebody my age and my training status, I'm probably at the point now that if I could gain just 0.25% of my body mass per week in true lean mass between connective tissue, skin, muscle, the works, I probably had a really good week. So if I'm gaining 2-3 pounds a week, it's probably just the stuff that's going to make me jiggle. So I just need to be mindful and then work with myself appropriately to get myself towards the goals that I want to be at. Any questions here over weight management? Okay, well, I'm going to show you guys 2 more things, which is just freaking awesome. So this is something that I'm playing with now, guys, and I'm going to try to break it down so it's a little bit easier to understand. But this is an article by Kevin Hall, who works at the NIH, National Institutes of Health. And this is so, so cool because he literally takes in this article, and notice, like, here's the glossary of all of the model variables for, notice, human metabolism and body weight change. And so this is just talking about your RQ and then the body, the choices that you're making as far as the intake. Gosh, it's so insane. So the fuel sources that the body's using. So what are we oxidizing more of? What's being really utilized in mixed models? But what's really cool is when he gets over here into both body weight and fat mass change over time, and then what's actually going to be observed between these individuals, along with, notice, the changing in the energy intake, total energy expenditure, resting metabolic rate, and how that can change whenever we increase the energy intake in individuals. And what's really cool is you can see how we start to see a bit of a mismatch with some of these components, where, notice, we see this precipitous body weight loss initially, but the fat mass loss is actually relatively stagnant here. So in this individual, in this case, you would have actually been losing way more of your lean mass than actually that fat mass. And it's just, but here's the thing that's really like blows my mind. So now, yeah, discussion, same thing where we have these issues, and I'll show you the formula that I put on the beginning. But here's the appendices, okay? Here are all the different formulas that go into all of the different effects of metabolic energy expenditures and how all of these are going to be influencing our total caloric demands for the day and how they're going to be influenced by each of the others and the other inputs that we can control. So just a nice and simple, I believe it ends up being 28 separate formulas that effectively completely explain the total energy turnover in a human body between all of the different fuel sources and the different inputs that are going to influence it. I'm going to have fun with this, and I'm going to see if I can make an Excel document where it all tracks together to give you the outputs, which would be awesome. But it looks pretty damn insane. If you guys want some extra credit, if one of you guys can make the working Excel document that tabulates everything and takes everything into a chord appropriately, I figure that's worth 50 points of extra credit, but it has to work perfectly. If it doesn't, then you wasted your time. Courtney's a hard pass there. That's okay. I mean, this is all the appendices. Like, dear God. Like, how awesome is this? I'm gonna have way too much fun looking at this thing. Okay, so the next thing that I want you guys to go and look at, and this is really cool, which is the body weight planner. Okay, so we're gonna have some fun with me. We're gonna say I'm 210 right now. Dalton, it's not gonna hurt my feelings. Do I look like, yeah, I work at school very light, physical activity in leisure time. We'll say I'm very active. Okay, so we're gonna click save on that. It's gonna take it a moment. Would you say I'm looking fat or looking probably the normal size that I normally am, or if I'm looking skinny? This is not a judgment. Okay, looking normal. So we'll say I'm around 210. Now, we'll say my goal weight is I'm going to try to get down to 180 pounds because that just sounds insane, but that's kind of funny. I want to reach my goal in 180 days. You know what? We're going to go full pain. We're going to say I'm going to do it in 90 days. Okay? So, right before my little sister's birthday, I'm going to be a $180 just ready to destroy the world. Physical activity change. I'm not doing any more physical activity. Screw that. And I'm not going to change it during my maintenance. So, here's my results. My current body weight size and physical activity, I'm expected to burn this many calories per day. In order to reach that goal, I need to eat this many calories per day for those 90 days. And once I get to that weight, to maintain that body size, I need to be burning this many calories. Now, here's what's really cool is notice this is a simulation where it's actually showing it over obviously 1 year, so 365 days, my initial weight, my final weight, my initial body fat. Oh, that's full of crap. I am not that fat. Can I change that? No, I can't. Well, that hurts my heart. Okay, so in reality, you can see how you're going to slowly, actually not slowly, I'm initially really just dropping that weight super fast until eventually it's arguably saying that I'm going to get down to that 180 and then I'm going to probably come back up and be hanging out around 182. But that's the average performance. Now, what do you guys think the lighter blue is on either side of that graph? What do you guys think the lighter blue is on either side of that graph? Bingo, the plus or minus the natural air variance. So if I was to follow their plan with the caloric intake, I might only get down to 186 on this plan by the end of that. Or if this is more aggressive and I burn way more calories than expects, it would think that I maybe get down to as low as 173. But then notice what's interesting with that new maintenance calories, depending on how my body adjusts to those new caloric demands, well, who knows? I might get to be less than 165. That's hilarious. I haven't weighed that since like, I think freshman year of high school. Or I might be all the way back up to 200 pounds over a long enough period of time because my metabolic rate is not as fast as this would explain. So that's what's I really like about this, that you can actually visualize these changes over time and how it's not perfect and there's a lot of variation that's in here. So what's really cool is you can throw on then the advanced controls where you can throw the uncertainty range. Right now it's saying 20 or 10%. If I kick that up to 20%, calories from carbs, oh, hell no, we know I don't like carbs that much. Sodium intake, oh, we're just gonna put right there because I like to live my life. Oh, there you go. Input 15, don't you dare say I'm that heavy. Okay, and so now with the advanced tabulation, we can see how my caloric intake's gonna be a little bit faster, but look at that, like, you actually might get fatter once you go into the new maintenance because your metabolic rate's probably faster than what we really think. God, that's so cool. So what do you think my body fat's gonna be? We will get down to 10%. Really? That's a pretty ineffective diet if I only get down to 10% body fat at 180, because that means I'm hemorrhaging a lot more lean mass. Man, that's a problem. And all the research in this area is mostly based upon aerobic style training, which figures you're just going to get smaller and weaker as you go, not like, jacked and lean. Cool. Questions over what I've shown you guys? Anything you guys want me to feel on weight maintenance and how we can do it and why it matters and everything? Can I send you the PDF, Daniel? Yeah, man. I'll I'll save that. I'll try to put that up on. Let me leave a note for myself. Um, keep a notepad to remind myself work to do outside of all the other work. Yay! So, microbiome, again, guys, is all of the bacteria that's naturally living on and around our body. So, we literally, every single part of our body is covered in a certain amount of bacteria, a certain amount of fungus, and it's not just one type of bacteria, but it's a wide variety of different types. Now, we talk about bacteria, that's usually going to be talking about prokaryotes, but there's also going to be eukaryotes, along with obviously a certain amount of viruses that are living on us, along with obviously fungus. And this is a normal thing. Now, depending on the area that you happen to be working with, you're going to have different microbes. And so the greatest amount inside of our body is actually going to be in our colon, specifically right at the beginning of it when it comes to bacterial density. And the lowest is actually going to be in our stomach. That's where we have the most of them that really, or the fewest number of them, because it turns out they're going to be being wiped out by the low pH environment because it's very hard for anything to live in. Now, what we're going to find is that the influence of this biome is really, really interesting. We don't know yet what is the perfect biome. We know there's a wide variety of biomes. We know that having a good biodiversity, meaning a lot of different bacteria in a relatively high number, tends to be pretty related to having healthier digestive system and healthier, or be essentially healthier overall. And all of these microbes are actually helping build a number of different metabolites that we're taking in inside of our large intestine. So this is making things like butyric acid. It's going to be making some other ketone bodies. It's going to be fermenting sometimes vitamin K and a couple other nutrients that are going to help us. And it literally is going to have influencing factors on our nervous system, which is obviously influence our mood, because a lot of our neurotransmitters are effectively made in our GI, and their precursors are quite frequently made by the bacteria occurring in. It is in turn going to actually literally influence our behavior. So individuals that are malnourished, individuals that have taken a lot of antibiotics, it's going to throw off their natural microbiome, and because of that, it can in turn literally influence not just their own intestinal health, but literally how they feel, how they function, and then also even how their immune system tends to work. There's a little bit of research, I mean, poco, I've only seen one study on it that was really fascinating, which is before the onset of type 1 diabetes in very young kids, there was a loss in biodiversity inside of the GI, with the idea that maybe part of that autoimmune reaction is due to a lack of healthy amount of bacteria inside of our digestive system. Something more invasive gets inside, effectively creates the quote unquote leaky gut, where effectively the cells are no longer against each other inside of our intestinal lining. There's a little bit of gap. Things sneak through in there. The body recognizes that as an outside invader, but unfortunately, it's also just similar enough to the beta cells of our pancreas. And then our body attacks our beta cells in the pancreas, and now we no longer have we no longer have insulin production, and you're a type 1 diabetic. So it's really important to understand that this exists. Now, okay, microbiome exists. We're surrounded by bacteria. Well, there's a number of things that we can do to potentially help it. One of which being eating fermented foods. This can be things like doing sauerkraut, kimchi. There's not actually a lot of information on kombucha working, but there's options there. There's literally been some studies utilizing fecal transplants. So literally transferring the feces, put in pills, given to another person, where then those bacteria then colonize their GI and cause actually a positive change on the microbiome and can actually influence their healthy body weight. And we do know if you're eating a diet that has a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruit, a lot of fiber, because fiber is going to be what those bacteria in your GI are naturally going to be fermenting is going to allow for them to have a normal, healthy function and proliferating themselves at appropriate levels, because they also, by being there, compete out against more negative pathogenic bacteria like E. coli that would love to colonize your GI if given half of a choice. Now, if we eat a lot of fast food, a lot of processed foods, this tends to have more of a negative effect on the microbiome. But once again, we don't have a really good working definition for what is an optimal microbiome, other than tends to be a lot of variety. If you're doing a lot of antibiotics, it tends to kill that off and make things a little bit worse. And then obviously, fun fact, and this is where I really miss seeing you guys in person, because talking this way is really interesting. Now, all of us have a microbiome. It obviously is made up of the bacteria that we have encountered over the course of our life. How did your microbiome get started? When was the first time you were introduced to bacteria? Now, the womb is actually a clean environment. There's no bacteria in there unless your mother's got a blood-borne infection. There's not going to be anything like that going around. Yes. So literally, how you were born, were you a vaginal delivery or were you a cesarean delivery, influences obviously what bacteria you're exposed to. If you're vaginal delivery, the first bacteria you ever encountered was that was naturally residing in your mother's vagina. And that's actually starting up your microbiome to a certain extent, which is not necessarily, actually statistically is supposedly a better thing, because that microbiome, individuals that are born in more vaginal delivery tend to have have better health outcomes, and they think the microbiome might be part of it. But then there's a lot of other factors going on with a vaginal delivery compared to a cesarean delivery. And Lord knows, if you're female, you choose to have a kid, you have a kid, you have to have a cesarean for a number of different complications that can occur. Don't feel bad about it. It's called life. It happens. And this is not the end all be all, because this is why they want to have skin to skin contact, and you can see other positive output or outcomes on health for having pets in the home, so that kids are constantly exposed to just a little bit of bacteria, and they're going to have a little bit more of this proliferating into their GI through the foods they eat. And otherwise, I'm not saying, drop it on the floor and lick it off the ground, but I am saying that there is a certain amount of bacteria that is probably optimal. We don't know what that is, but it's probably not better to, effectively eat nothing but, irradiated food that has nothing growing on it. Now, that being said, wash your damn hands and use social distancing due to the wonderful realities that we're living through these days. But what questions do you guys have for me on the microbiome? If you're looking for a really good resource, there was my friend, her name is Gabriella Fundero. You can look her up on social media or listen to any of the interviews that she's given or presentations on the topic. She is hilarious and incredibly knowledgeable in the area if you are ever so inclined. So, any questions, comments, concerns? I find it fascinating. Is there preferred page range on our papers? Yes, enough. I would honestly suggest most of you guys can probably bang it out in 4 to 5 pages. So when you're writing your literature review, the big key is you make it a review, which means that you are synthesizing all of the articles that you have put together so far. So I think I've got a couple papers that I'm reading right now, which means that I'm doing a really crummy job of reading them because I'm trying to read too many at the same time. Let me see if I can pull up one of the reviews I'm looking at. Courtney, no. If it's 8 pages, that's absolutely fine. If that's what you had to do in order so you could get it done right, then you're all good. Oh, well, here you go. So here's a review that I'm reading right now. Now, narrative is not really good because it's not a meta-analysis. Instead, it's kind of writing what you want to say. But notice this is how you should go. Kind of you can go objective methods. This is just the abstract. So kind of what you researched, what you're going into, results, and then the conclusion, okay? Now, when we're getting into actually reading, the article. And so I guess I don't have the PDF attached to this, and I cannot get my controls of this. Well, that was dumb to put that up there. Nope. Every time I push the top of the screen, it clicks. Okay, well, I guess I'm stopping the sharing over on there. Great. So now I can kind of see what I'm doing. Give me a minute. So let's go ahead. Oh, my hair's getting long. Okay. So if I come on over here, the Jack Russell Terrier comes good in. What do we got here? Okay. All these happy authors, they've got their abstract. Okay. Introduction is going ahead and giving us the information on what's going on, and then starting to explain all the different methods of what's going on, or potential causes for it. This is giving us a happy little flow chart of all the different influences. And then now we're getting into. So notice here, guys, it's never in study 1, they found this. In study 2, they found this. In study 3, they found this. Instead, what it's a combination of is, given the information that they've been able to come across, you know, this, that, and the other has been established in the area. This is what, you know, seems to be occurring. This is how everything goes together. So it's not study 1, study 2, study 3. It's instead studies 1 through 5 in general found this result. Study 4 disagreed with studies 1, 2, 3, and 5 in X way, because maybe it was a different population. Maybe it was a different dosage of your supplement. Maybe it was a different application of the training. Or maybe studies 1 through 4 were acute, and acute, the supplement doesn't work. But 5 through 10, it was taken chronically, and chronically does work. So end of it is saying, you definitely need to take it for a long time if you want effect. If you take it acutely, you're wasting your money. Does that kind of give you a little bit more of the idea of the structure of it and kind of what I'm looking for? Awesome. Any other questions that I can help you guys with your papers, your projects, anything else along those lines? I did have a good question. I think it was from you, Courtney, where you're asking me about the graphs. Guys, your log 1 graph is just logging the 4 days, and then the log 2 is the next 4 days. Write down your units and make sure that you're making the individual graphs for each thing that I'm asking for. So at the end of it, it should be a lot of graphs, like a lot of them. But you still want to go ahead and have all that information in there, so that way we can see and compare your total calories in for each of the first 4 days, your total calories in for the second four days, and then we can see the comparison of those two in another graph. Same thing with the protein, the carbs, the fats, the sodium, the other micronutrient that you're into, and then looking at your resting metabolic rate, your energy expenditure that you're going to be having through those periods. Anything else that I can help with today? Next week, we're just going to meet briefly, talk about nutrigenomics, and then the graduate students have their presentations, and we're just going to have them go ahead and record their slides, so that way I can go ahead and put those up on Blackboard. So you guys are going to be able to just go ahead, hop on there, download them, and there'll be just a simple question over each of them on your final exam. So if there's no other questions, we're going to go ahead and call it a night. I'll take that as there's no other questions. So thanks for zooming in, guys. Miss seeing you guys. I hope you guys are doing okay. I delivered some protein powder to Dalton today because he needs a little bit. If any of the rest of you guys need anything, just shoot me a message. And by delivered, he met me on campus in the parking lot. So yeah, it probably looked like a drug deal going on from a distance, just without any giving of money, and then also with social distancing. So if you guys need anything, let me know. I'll get you guys what you need. Stay safe out there, and yeah, make sure you guys are staying on top of everything. Talk to you later, guys. Bye bye.